I want to go now up to New York and our colleague John Dickerson, who has been standing by. John Dickerson, we have been tapping into your encyclopedic knowledge of presidential history on too frequent a basis these days. It's hard to believe, John, that it was just a week ago that we were talking about the attempted assassination of the Republican nominee, and now we are talking about a change at the very top of the Democratic ticket. I wonder what your thoughts are about where we are in this moment.
Well, the old expression that a week is a lifetime in politics, it feels like the debate on the 27th of June was back in the Middle Ages. The number of things that have changed within the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, but just focused for a moment on the Democratic Party. You know, the Democratic Party was not, there was this push against the sitting president, but there was also a lot of pushing and ripping within the Democratic Party. There were a lot of harsh things being said by those who were responding to the president's debate performance. There were a lot of accusations among rank and file that those who were just sticking with Biden were essentially engaging in the same kind of behavior as the Trump team. When you start making those kinds of accusations, it gets pretty ugly. So that, for the moment, is on pause. The movement to Harris is happening pretty fast. There are a lot of people who haven't spoken out because, as some previously have mentioned, you know, the shop is open a little bit, which is to say when a politician needs your support, you can get things in return. There are also members of leadership who have to make sure that any wounded parties or any people who might have a future in the Democratic Party are tended to and listened to and heard out. So that might delay some people from endorsing Harris. But at bottom, the Democratic Party had a problem it could not fix, which was the challenges of Joe Biden's age, because time only moves in one direction. And they were proved in the difficulty of fixing it by his performance from the 27th of June onward. Now they have a whole set of other challenges, some of which are not even known to us. As Norah was mentioning, the effort to define Kamala Harris will ramp up considerably. However, at least the thinking at the moment is it's a set of challenges they can address, whereas the signature one, blocking Joe Biden's successful candidacy, was one they really couldn't fix. So that's the way it feels at this nanosecond, but I have the right to completely revise everything in 5 seconds when it changes again.
John, that's becoming part of the job requirement, frankly, for all of us to be quick on our feet in this moment. Stay with us, if you would. I want to go to Nancy Cordes at the White House because I'm told she has some reporting for us. Nancy?
Margaret, we're now hearing for the first time from a member of President Biden's family about this decision. CBS News had a brief conversation with Frank Biden, one of President Biden's two younger brothers, and here's what he told us. He said, "I'm incredibly proud of my brother. Selfishly, I will have him back to enjoy whatever time we have left. He is a genuine hero. Country over self." It sounds corny in our cynical political environment, but he nor I are cynical. The goal remains the same: defeat Trump and continue the work that Joe has done. My hope is that our party rallies around this heroic act. We asked him whether he feels that his brother's overall health and vitality played a major role in this decision, and he says, in my humble opinion, absolutely. So a member of the president's family now confirming that the president's health was indeed a major factor in this decision, and calling his brother a hero for making the decision to pass the torch to Kamala Harris.
So, Nancy, sorry, can you clarify that the family is saying his health was or was not a factor?
He's saying that, in his humble opinion, yes, the president's health and vitality played a considerable role in his decision. It's important to note Frank Biden is not speaking for the family writ large. This was simply a conversation between CBS News and Frank Biden. Unclear how much input he had in this decision, but he says that he believes that his brother's health did play a role, and he says that the goal remains the same: to defeat Donald Trump.
Well, that is notable because to date, the family, the White House, the establishment has rejected the premise that there was anything that was challenging the president's mental acuity or his health, and that all these accusations were baseless, that it was just age and a few, difficult nights like he had on the debate stage. So that is a change in message. Ed?
You were talking to John, and John, I'd be curious for your thoughts on this too, that the debate felt like the Middle Ages, and that was only about the 27th of June. I would take things all the way back to the first week of June, when the president went to France for the D-Day commemoration events, and then flew back on Sunday the 9th, and then flew again to Italy later that week. He bounced from Europe to Washington to Europe, and in the midst of all this, his son was under federal trial in Wilmington, lest we forget. His wife was ping-ponging back and forth from Wilmington to Paris to attend these events. There was incredible personal and emotional strain on the president.
That's a great point.
And had to be doing the day job of literally holding NATO together as they marked a major anniversary, and then go to Italy for similar high-stakes meetings, and then fly all the way to Los Angeles in mid-June for a $25 million fundraiser with the former president, and then had all these other things to do. It was incredible strain for anyone. That's what led to this debate night where he admits now he probably had worked too hard. And I just wonder, John, when we look back at his presidency, will that decision to have done that, to have not kept him in Europe maybe for those 3 extra days, or to send him at all in the height of this campaign season, could that have been the signal that just said to him, I can't do this anymore, I'm too old, and it clearly is straining me. But to me now, whenever I see this, I just think it started with that trip to Europe. It didn't start with the debate. And this whole 8-week period was just too much for an 81-year-old
The question of stamina.
Yeah.
I want to bring in Robert Costa on that point. Robert.
So I also got some new reporting. One of the key constituencies we're watching right now in the Democratic Party is organized labor. The president's closest ally politically has been Sean Fain, the head of the United Auto Workers in this country. He has gone to union hall after union hall. Speaking to top labor sources in this country, they say that they believe Vice President Harris has been an ally and champion for the UAW and working people across this country. They're committed to defeating former President Trump, but they will meet in the coming days to decide next steps. Not any formal endorsement coming soon for Vice President Harris, but they offered a lot of positive support for her informally at this moment before they have a membership meeting with the UAW's International Executive Board.
That is significant indeed. At this hour, President Joe Biden has said he will not seek re-election and is endorsing his Vice President Kamala Harris. We have heard from the Clintons in a joint statement saying that they endorse the vice president and, quote, will do whatever we can to support her, in their words, because as the Clintons say, nothing has made us more worried for our country than the threat posed by a second Trump term. We have also heard from the office of Barack and Michelle Obama, noting and talking about their dear friend, Joe Biden. Of course, they served together for 8 years. They have not yet endorsed Kamala Harris, but that is the expectation. A number of other Democratic leaders also weighing in at this hour, throwing their support behind the vice president, or some of the governors who could have been potential Democratic nominees saying they will not stand in her way. Let's bring in CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang. She is at the U.S. Naval Observatory where Vice President Harris lives. Weijia?
Norah, she returned here to her residence last night around 7:30 from Massachusetts following a grueling, intense week on the campaign trail, where, as you have been talking about, she was fiercely defending President Biden at every turn that she could, anytime that she had an opportunity to talk about the fact that he is staying in the race and that she was standing by his side. But of course, we know now that she faces a massive decision here, and we know that she and the president spoke several times today before he made that announcement. And whether she is here or not, we aren't exactly sure, because there is not always a protective group of reporters that travels with the vice president, and we don't have details about her movements for today, but certainly you can imagine that she has been on the phone in many, many conversations talking about, what's next for her, and of course, who she might run with. And Norah, I spoke with sources who say the big question is who can fill the void that President Biden is going to leave from the ticket. And, they believe the list is actually quite short. And as you mentioned, include many of those, some, I should say, because it is short list, some of those Democratic governors, especially in swing states. But I also heard from one source that we should be looking at former Secretary of Labor Marty Walsh, who was also the mayor of Boston at one time. Of course, everybody has something to say about this, and we won't know until we know about that short list exactly what it is. But this is a monumental decision that the vice president is trying to make right now. And so, again, she is here, we believe, at her residence in Northwest Washington. We have not seen her on camera today. She has not made any remarks, but of course we do have that lengthy statement talking about her appreciation for the president and how she intends to move forward and, frankly, win this race. Norah?
Weijia Jiang at the U.S. Naval Observatory, where the Vice President of the United States lives and where Kamala Harris is believed to be meeting with advisors at this hour after speaking with President Joe Biden. Let's pause now as it is 5 o'clock in the East, 2 in the West. We are on the air because in a momentous decision, President Biden says he is dropping out of the presidential race, saying in part, quote, "It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve as your president. And while it has been my intention to seek re-election, I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down and to focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term." Mr. Biden then followed shortly with another statement endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris. And we have seen that within the past hour, Vice President Harris responded with her own statement. Let me read from that. "I am honored to have the president's endorsement, and my intention is to earn and win this nomination." Also, we have heard from the Clintons, Biden ally Jim and Representative Jim Clyburn, Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar, all among some of the high-profile Democrats sending their messages of thanks to President Biden and also endorsing Vice President Harris. Now, President Biden says he will address the nation later this week. Let's go to John Dickerson. And what a political earthquake. This decision by the president throws this contest into chaos.
Yes, and aftershocks to come, for sure, not just because we've all been conditioned by the events of the last few weeks to be on guard for big political developments that come quick and fast, but because this opens up a lot of activity. There's, as you mentioned before, the attacks that will begin from the Trump campaign. That question of vice president and who that pick will be, it will be the first presidential level decision that Kamala Harris will make if she, in fact, goes on to become the nominee, and all the movement here seems to be going towards her, and because there's not a real alternative. And if somebody wanted to be the alternative, they would have to get out there fast, as these endorsements keep coming pretty darn quickly. But the decision to pick a vice president, one of the challenges for Harris is, will voters, and there'll be a lot of guessing about the voters, and we're just going to have to sit tight and wait to see what the polling shows. But will voters judge her as a possible commander-in-chief against the alternative, Donald Trump, or against some other standard? That's one question. Sometimes related to that is, how does she make decisions? And the vice presidential pick is one of those things. And that's something that's got a lot of political sensitivity, and it's coming at this time where she's going to be facing thousands of decisions right now about what to do next and where. But that vice presidential decision will be a kind of stand-in for presidential level decisions for Harris. And so it's not just who's in the job, but the rationale for it, and how cleanly that comes off, because sometimes vice presidential picks can wound a candidacy.
It's an excellent point. John Dickerson, thank you. Want to bring in Robert Costa for reaction from the Republican side. And I know you spoke with former President Donald Trump.
Yes, just in the last few minutes, I did speak with former President Donald Trump. A quiet weekend where former President Trump, Norah, you and I are golf fans, watched the British Open earlier today. It was going to be a quiet day of golf for many golf fans around the country. One of them is former President Trump. Well, he did react to the news, to CBS News, in a conversation, and he said that this was a shock to the country. Shock to him, but it really a shock to the country. He said it's also, quote, good for the country. He believes that Vice President Harris is probably going to be his opponent, but he made no commitment to debate her at this time, citing his belief that she might not end up as the Democratic nominee. He said he is going to wait and see how the Democratic nomination unfolds, and then he will make a final decision about whether he will debate the Democratic nominee. Our reporting shows the Democrats consolidating around Harris, but not every single one of them at this time. When I asked him about the campaign, I said, how does this change everything? You're now not running against President Biden. He said that's absolutely not right. He said he is running, in his view, against the Biden administration, and he said he's running against their record. He called it the worst presidency in history, and he believes that he can run against President Biden's record and policies and win a large electoral victory this November.
Robert Costa with that new development. Thank you. Want to bring in Ed O'Keefe, who covers the White House and the campaign. What are you learning?
A few things. It's now officially the Harris campaign for president. The paperwork has been amended with the Federal Election Commission just in the last little bit here. It's now the principal candidate is Kamala Harris, and she's seeking the presidency, according to this.
The lawyers moved quickly.
They did. The Harris Victory Fund is among the joint accounts that have been established, and a few other things as well. So her name is now there. The president's has been removed. We know they spoke several times earlier today after he made this decision and started telling people. We are not expected to see the vice president today, I am told. That could always change, but the current plan is to not see her, and we'll wait to see when and if we see her tomorrow in some form.
Can I build on Ed's excellent reporting for a moment? I'm hearing from top Democratic sources that the next 72 hours are critical for Vice President Harris. Does she wait for President Biden to speak? He has said he wants to address the nation in the coming days, or does she go public immediately? Will she hold a news conference? Will she meet with Democratic leaders and answer questions in a public forum? And we're still waiting to see what Senator Bernie Sanders is going to do and others. For example, just weeks ago on Face the Nation, Senator Sanders said, when I said to him, what will you do if President Biden drops away from the ticket? He said, well, right now I'm focused on running for re-election. And he said, again, right now that's my focus. So a lot of Democrats so far are being somewhat coy about what they're going to do. If she can't assert herself immediately as the de facto Democratic nominee, now, as Ed reported, she's doing it legally, professionally, politically, but it's not a done deal. And so this is such a crucial window for her to establish herself forcefully as the nominee, because if anyone sees daylight there and they're ambitious, they might step in and start to stir the pot.
The vice president facing fresh scrutiny at this hour as she attempts to become the Democratic nominee with the backing of the current president and a number of top Democratic lawmakers.